succession plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of the corporate governance profession.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.
Hello and thanks for joining us on Corporate Governance Platform, proudly brought to you by the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals. I'm beaming live from MITV in Lagos, your darling station. My name is Tunde Odeyemi, and in the next couple of minutes, we'll be discussing practical governance tips to avoid corporate failures. And to lead in the discussion is our distinguished fellow of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, Mr. David OLATUNJI. Mr. David OLATUNJI is an extraordinary trainer, teacher, speaker, and a corporate governance expert. He has communicated his thoughts to corporate leaders across industries and private sectors of the economy. He is well known for his practical, insightful, real-world perspectives on learning. His experience in education and knowledge impartation has spanned over 20 years in the banking, manufacturing, insurance, educational, communications, media, and the imaging sectors of the economy. He has received intense training both locally and abroad across Belgium, Germany, and the United Kingdom. He was a faculty member of ICSAN, where he taught professional administration, corporate administration, strategic and operations management, and corporate governance from 1997 to 2005. Mr. OLATUNJI was a council member of ICSAN between 1997 and 2004. He authored the corporate governance study textbook for ICSAN. Mr. OLATUNJI is the CEO of David OLATUNJI Leadership Academy, a learning hub for incubating leaders in good governance and authentic leadership. He is involved in international financial reporting standards, training, and consulting. Mr. OLATUNJI, we are glad to have you on Corporate Governance Platform this evening.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here too.
Okay. This evening we want to discuss corporate failures. Okay. I want to look at practical governance tips to avoid corporate failures. There are a lot of corporate failures all out there. We want to let our viewers learn on how to avoid corporate failures. And this is where our viewers are going to be involved in today's program. You can ask questions or send comments by text message. You can only send it to 08023231287. I'll take the number again, 08023231287. You have the telephone number on the screen of your television set. Only text message, please, no call. And the topic again is practical governance tips to avoid corporate failures. Yeah, Mr. OLATUNJI, you are welcome once again.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we go into corporate failures, what exactly does corporate governance entails?
Well, I think in defining it, it's very important for me to mention how it came about. The first committee that defined corporate governance, as I always say, is the Sir Adherence Cadbury Committee of 1992. And it's the committee that gave the first, prominent definition of corporate governance as the system by which organizations are directed and controlled. But for our discussion this evening, I want to pick the definition of King 4 Code of South Africa on corporate governance. And it says, and I quote, is the exercise of ethical and effective leadership by the governing board of organizations in order to arrive at outcomes that will ensure the sustainability of the business. In other words, to prevent corporate failure of the organization. And let me add my I always like to end any definition of corporate governance by adding this. Is a system by which the different and conflicting interests of all stakeholders in organizations are closely aligned, are brought into some kind of alignment so that the interest of one stakeholder will not jeopardize the interest of the other.
Oh, wow. That is very comprehensive. Yeah. Now, what then do we mean when we say corporate failure has occurred?
Well, it's just like you saying that the health of an individual has occurred. When you get to hospitals and medical doctors take their vitals and all that, and they come to the conclusion of a diagnosis that the health of so person has collapsed. We've had that before. The same way organizations also can collapse. When organization collapse, it means that the health has failed. And there are several factors that could lead to this. But one key factor that is very important is when an organization fails to meet its debts and liabilities, when the income coming in, when the profit coming in, when the revenue coming in is now insufficient in meeting debts, in meeting obligations and the liabilities of the organization, of course the result is corporate failure. Also, when governance system fails, like when you have unethical board, when you have ineffective board, when you have internal control problems, when you have risk management problems, and so on and so forth, definitely all these factors can lead to corporate failure. In other words, corporate failure happens when the health of an organization also has failed.
When the health of an organization has failed, yes, the organization can no longer meet its liabilities.
No, the ongoing concern status of the organization is in jeopardy. Then the organization can no longer be sustainably managed into the future. Because the issue of sustainability has come in now. Ability to meet the needs of the present generation, at the same time moving into the future to meet the needs of the future generation. So when an organization fails, it can no longer move into the future to meet the needs of future generations.
Okay, obviously we have some companies that are falling into this trap.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples in the developed world, like United Kingdom, United States of America, that is internationally recognized as corporate failure?
In the late 80s, I will start from the late 80s and very early 90s, it was a spate of corporate failures in the United Kingdom. It was a time when, for instance, Mirror Group International failed, when Polypec failed, when BCCI of London failed. Like the Polypec, Asinada was both the chairman and the CEO, which was an aberration of corporate governance. You see, the two positions should not be held by an individual. But we had the situation whereby Asinada became both the chairman and the CEO, and he did as he liked on the board. He was a domineering personality. So at the end of the day, he stole a lot of money from the organization. He was actually sentenced to about 10 years, imprisonment after that. So Polypec is an example. And it's one of the reasons why Sir Cadbury Committee was raised to look at it. The Mirror Group International too was another example, headed by Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell also was, incidentally, also was the chairman and the CEO of the Mirror Group International. So he did as he liked to on the board. You see, when you have a board that only carry out decisions, to the which are caprices of the chairman or the CEO, that board is ineffective, right? So that's what happened in Mirror Group International, Polypec. And when you move to the United States, the popular one is Enron in 2002. Enron just filed bankruptcy, from the status of about the fourth largest organization in the United States then, just filed bankruptcy almost, overnight. What happened? A lot of financial reporting irregularities. For instance, one very key one is, the management of the organization hiding debts and liabilities away from the balance sheet, thereby now giving false report earnings, for the shareholders. So at the time, the shareholders lost confidence, and because they lost confidence, the share prices began to fall. And what we had eventually was the failure of Enron. And you also have WorldCom, a communication company in the United States, then also had a problem with reporting their earnings. You see, they had these $3.8 billion expenses that was not charged to profit, right? That was not charged to profit and loss account, but was capitalized. That was very criminal. And at the end of the day, whistleblower, blew the whistle, and the organization also failed. Those are examples of UK companies and United States companies. Of course, there are so many.
Okay, coming back home, do we have examples of companies that have also fallen into the trap of corporate scandals? Maybe you can share one or two with us.
Oh, definitely. In 2015 or so, there was this scandal of Guinness Nigeria PLC, was fined by NAFDAC for about almost 1 billion naira, or about $5 million or so, because of expired raw materials that NAFDAC actually gave an instruction to burn, to destroy, because it was expired. But at the end of the day, I think there was some kind of regulatory infraction, on behalf or by Guinness. And there was also this, a popular case of Cadbury in 2006, where about 30 billion naira was reported, irregularly by Cadbury, by the management of Cadbury. So it had to take Cadbury shares from England to send auditors to come and dictate that. And at the end of the day, Cadbury was fined, and Akintola Williams too was the auditor of Cadbury at that time, also was fined, because when an organization engages in financial reporting irregularities, it sends a wrong signal to shareholders, because shareholders can no longer base their decisions on information that is credible, that is understandable, and that is straightforward.
Okay, with these examples in Nigeria in the early 2000s, how would you assess the state of adherence to corporate governance in Nigeria in this dispensation?
From let's say the count of 1 to 10, I could actually put it at about 3 or 4, right?
3 or 4?
Yes, about 3 or 4.
Wonderful.
You see, the adherence to corporate governance principles in Nigeria is just done by lip service, and there are a lot of reasons for that, right? One of the critical reasons actually is the failure of regulators themselves to actually control, you understand, what they ought to control. In the case of Cadbury, that SEC was a little bit late in responding to Cadbury issues, and the same way that regulators in Nigeria, almost all of them, right, they are at times so late in responding to corporate frauds and corporate scandals, and all that, just because of bribery and corruption. You see, any nation where bribery and corruption is so embedded as a culture, you understand, then regulation you just pay lip service to regulation. So as a result of that, I sincerely believe that there's still a lot of things to do as far as corporate governance codes, corporate governance principles, corporate governance concept systems and structures in Nigeria, as far as it's concerned.
Okay, adherence to corporate governance in Nigeria is between 3 to 4 over 10.
About 3 to 4.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, if you are just joining us, it's Corporate Governance Platform, and we are discussing practical governance tips to avoid corporate failures. You just heard in Nigeria, corporate governance adherence is still at a low rate. You can be part of the program by asking questions or by sending your comments to 080-2323-1287. The number again, your comments by text message to 080-2323-1287. Now, Mr. Olatunji,
Yes.
do you subscribe to the views that adherence to corporate governance is an antidote to corporate failures?
Adherence of corporate governance as an antidote to corporate failures, I do not really subscribe to it. You see, in a way, there is a modicum of result you can gain from adhering to corporate governance principles. but that is going to now be an antidote to corporate governance failure, or sorry, corporate failures generally. I do not subscribe to that, and I can give you an example. You know, in the late 2000s in Nigeria, about 5 banks collapsed. These 5 banks were led, you know, by the people I sincerely, you know, want to emulate in the society. They were people that I sincerely believe in their credibility, I believe in their qualifications, I believe in their antecedents, their experiences, qualifications, and so on and so forth. But what happened? They set aside corporate governance principles. They set aside Basel Accord 1, 2, 3 on risk management. So some of those banks took excessive risks. Intercontinental Bank being an example, took an excessive risk. The shareholders are not afraid that you should subject the investment to risk, because they know also that without risk there can be returns. But they are extremely very concerned when you now subject, you know, their shares or their investments to excessive risk, especially when there is no robust risk management, you know, policy in place. Do you understand? So the banks failed not because there was no corporate governance. At that time, there was Atedo Peter side of corporate governance. Okay. There was the CBN code of corporate governance. The CBN too was, you know, like a regulator over the banks. There was Basel Accord. You know, all these things were there. There was karma. Do you understand? But somehow they shunned it. Let me tell you one thing. You know, like I believe so much in what Mevlin King said. Mevlin King is the former Supreme Court judge of South Africa. He midwifed the Corporate Governance Code of South Africa, and he said this. He said corporate governance should not be only quantitative, it should be qualitative, because you cannot legislate good behavior. In other words, good behavior cannot be driven by codes. You see, it has to be driven by individual character. And that is why the board members that you are bringing in to manage the company, their character is extremely very important. You know, where they have been is very important. We're looking for people who will go beyond codes, who will not do box ticking exercise before they can manage organizations, who will bring personal character to bear in the running of the organization. Because sincerely, I believe you cannot legislate good behavior. You know, when I put together a book on corporate governance, what came to me is that these are all very nice things that I've put together, but this thing can't work without self-governance. If individuals cannot manage themselves, then you cannot manage the organizations, you cannot manage codes, you cannot use codes to manage anything. And that is why a lot of board of directors in Nigeria today, they circumvent, even KAMA, they circumvent corporate governance code for individual and personal interest. You see, when you have individuals, corporate citizens, you have individual citizens in the society that raise their interests above the interests of the general citizenry of the company, then they shun corporate governance, they shun KAMA. It doesn't matter people who have put it together, it doesn't matter their qualifications, people will not adhere to it, because this thing comes from inside rather than from outside.
Okay, I'm going to emphasize on that. If adherence to corporate governance cannot completely or fully be an antidote to corporate failures, what do you suggest? You mentioned good behavior, but I want you to put it in a very good perspective so that our viewers can understand what really can prevent corporate failure.
You know what? If you want to prevent corporate failure, every organization, whether it's private, whether it's public, it doesn't matter who you are, you have to start from the grassroots, and that is who is leading the company. You have to be concerned about who is the board. You know, who are the members of the board. We are not just talking about balancing skills, balancing experiences, balancing qualifications, or balancing gender on the board, but what is their character. Let me give you an example. In the United Kingdom, before you can appoint board members, for instance, you have to go, you know, to the company house, find out, right, from the black book. They have a black book where directors that have contravened regulations before are listed. So they have a list of directors who can never pick as a board member anymore. So let's look at the selection of members of the board. This issue of bringing board members, because it used to be my classmate, it used to be my cousin, it used to be my in-law, and because of that we bring in people who don't even have character, people who have not managed their own home, people who have not managed their own living room. You bring them to come and manage multi-billion naira organizations. So it actually starts with who are you bringing on board? Who are the executive directors? Who are the non-executive directors? Who are the independent non-executive directors? And once you have done that too, it also goes to, let's have some what we call personalities. There are professional ethics, there are corporate ethics, but there are also personalities. So everybody needs to have an ethical conduct. The standards beneath which no board member should be able to function or operate. Because this thing, as I mentioned before, is more of a personal character than using the box-ticking principles to run an organization. It doesn't matter the kind of karma you put in place or the kind of corporate governance if you put in place. A thief will always be a thief. A corrupt man will always be a corrupt man. And the corrupt man will always look for ways of circumventing policies, circumventing rules, circumventing principles and all that. Do you know that you can be legally unethical? Right.
You are legal, but you are unethical.
Oh, you is so much. And that's what we see most times in Nigeria.
Okay, let's look at the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance 2018. I know the code evolved so that we can also have, we can minimize corporate failure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, would you say this code is inconsistent with global best practice?
Well, I will say that too, because for me, I have gone through the code and I've seen maybe one or two issues with the code. Let me give you about two. Number one, in the composition of the committees, there are some committees, the composition must be entirely independent non-executive directors. For instance, the remuneration committee or the audit committee. Why do you bring in directors that are not independent? Being independent means is not having more than 0.01% of the share capital of the company. Being independent is that he has no financial connection at all with the company. His son is not doing IT with the company. The wife is not the one supplying food to the company, and so on and so forth. If you don't have such directors to be in those committees, the committees cannot be effective. But I've read the code. The code actually allows that non-executive directors can be members of the audit committee, can be members of the remuneration committee, even though, majority should be highness and all that. I sincerely believe that if you want to get, integrity, if you want to get board members that will serve like counterbalance to the excesses of the executive directors, the committees must be composed with highness. So that's one. But having said that, nominations and governance committee actually can have nets, can even have maybe one or two executive directors. Do you understand? Because it is the directors that know about the vacancies of the board and all that, so they can actually also help in recommending good people. That's one. Then two, I also read that there's some kind of inconsistency. You see, the preamble says that the code is principles based. Okay. Meaning individual organizations can apply as they deem fit, and they should be able to explain why they have applied this and why they have not applied this. But in now coming up with this apply and explain, the code says apply and explain. When you look at that grammar, apply and explain, it means there is no way you can dance around the principles. I sincerely believe that you can dance around principles of corporate governance because individual culture is different, sizes are different, individual sectors is different. You cannot get principles that will now be applied generally to all the companies. Do you understand? Irrespective of character of the company, irrespective of the essence of the company. And by and large, apply and explain means that you can't do that, right? And that is not what South African code is saying. South African code is saying apply or explain. UK code is saying comply or explain. Do you understand? So I sincerely believe that corporate governance in any clime should be principles based and not legislation. corporate governance should not be legislation. You cannot have two legislation. You cannot have CAMA and you have a corporate governance principle ODD.
Okay, in line with this, what do you think are the best approaches to entrenching corporate governance principles?
I sincerely believe, it's personal, I believe in principles based. I don't believe, all over the world now, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 of the United States, that is purely legislation. And it came because in 2002, a lot of organizations really collapsed. And a lot of stakeholders, the interests of a lot of stakeholders were jeopardized. And because of that, I'm sure the United States government thought then, that rightly so, that this issue needed, a very stringent response. And because of that, they took Senator Sabins and Representative Oxley, put them together, and they brought out the legislation of corporate governance. Corporate governance. Why don't subscribe to corporate governance in Nigeria being legislation or being rules-based? You see, you cannot have one of the reasons is you cannot have both CAMA and corporate governance code. It's a duplication. Do you understand? Then you will now reduce the running of an organization to purely a box-ticking exercise. I always like to say this. It doesn't matter the kind of corporate governance you have in organization. Corporate governance without corporate strategy is corporate disaster.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this last question because of our time, and I want you to handle this in less than 30 seconds or 40 seconds. What is the relationship between effective risk management and corporate governance and prevention of corporate failures?
Well, when you manage risks, it's actually, in this regard now, I define corporate governance as the response of an organization to its risk. There are business risks, external risks, internally generated risks. Do you understand? And these risks are what actually subject organizations to corporate failure. So the corporate governance principle has tilted more to risk management policy. Identify the risk, estimate the risk, and control the risk, and prevent the risk. At times, even through the establishment of whistleblowing procedure, to make sure that things don't get bad before you manage it. You use preventive approach in managing your risk before the risk collapse. As a matter of fact, all over the world now, the current debate is that the board cannot even meet without talking about the risks of the organization first, because that is very major. That is where the returns even come from. Risk, returns. If there's no risk, there's no return.
Okay,
carry out
in essence, effective risk management can also
prevent corporate failure. Yes.
Okay, this is where we wrap it up. Thank you very much, Mr. David Olatunji.
Thank you.
FCIS and CEO David Olatunji Leadership Academy. Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for being part of the show. We invite you to join us again next week, same station, same time. I remain Tunde Odeyemi. Keep spreading the gospel of corporate governance. Bye for now.
Do you have continuity or association plan for your business?
Has anyone shared the concept of sustainability with you?
What about the need to protect the rights of minority shareholders?
What are those ingredients germane to having effective meetings?
For these and many more, tune into Corporate Governance Platform every Thursday on MITV, your darling station, on DSTV 255 and UHF 43 at 4:30 p.m.
Corporate Governance Platform is your best medium for informative and educative strategies for the practice of the corporate governance profession.
Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, the hub of governance professionals.